Hi everybody, today I want to talk about something very personal. I talked about it before, but I never talked about it directly, and that is because it took me a very long time to be able to talk about it, and that is my childhood. Because in some of my earlier videos, I just said that I had a very difficult childhood, and in some other videos I talked about it a bit more, and in some videos I even mentioned that I was sexually abused as a child. Now I can talk about it, but for a long time I was not able to talk about that. And I wish I would have been able to talk about it earlier, because it would have cleared up a lot of misunderstandings and a lot of problems and issues I had. Because of course I was bullied a lot, because I was insecure as a result of having been sexually abused. So as a child I was bullied a lot, and even when growing up it was very difficult for me. It was difficult for me to find a job. A lot of people couldn't understand me, and they just thought I was acting strange, and I wasn't able to explain to them why I was acting so insecure. And yeah, it was really difficult. And even to this day, there are some people who know me, or who knew me as a child, and they thought, even some people in my family, they thought, oh, he's acting strange. I don't want to have anything to do with him. He's weird, and he's insecure. He's weird, you know. Even some people in my family think that way. I wanted to explain to them what was really going on, but they didn't want to listen. And of course, earlier on, it was more difficult, as I said, for me to even explain it. And I already made a video for those people who know me, and where I explained what happened to me in my childhood. But that was in German. But there were also some people who knew me from my childhood, or from my years as an adolescent, and they speak English. They don't speak German. So I wanted to make this video for them to now explain what was going on, because maybe they couldn't explain it themselves, and they just thought, you know, I was acting strange, I was weird, I was a weirdo, and they didn't want to have anything to do with me. So it's even very difficult for me to contact these people, because some of them don't want to have anything to do with me. But I would like to explain to them, now that I'm able to explain it, what was going on. So I'm making this video hoping that maybe they will see this video, so that after all these years I can explain to them why I was, in their eyes, acting so weird. Okay, so let's explain what happened. To say it directly, when I was a very young child, when I was it started when I was very young, and the sexual abuse was most extreme when I was around 4 years old. That's basically when it peaked. And I was abused by my mother, and that was a huge problem, because even now, but particularly back then, it was very difficult for people to even imagine, much less believe, that that somebody could get sexually abused by his mother, or that a mother would be capable of doing that. A lot of people, even now, but especially back then, can't imagine that, can't believe that. That is why every time I was trying to get help, and I was trying to explain to people what's going on, they dismissed it. They didn't believe it. So it was really difficult. It was basically, as a child, it was impossible for me to get help. I was doing my utmost to get help. I ran away dozens of times. And in the end, I did run away. I ran away when I was 15 years old, and I was living alone since I have been 15 years old. Of course, now I'm married, but basically, since I was 15 years old until I married, I was living alone. Of course, I would have loved to live with a family. I would have loved, I went to the police. I went to my teachers when I had teachers. I didn't always have teachers because my mother didn't always let me go to school. In Germany, there is a law that children have to go to school, but she just broke the law. Basically, she didn't care. A lot of times she didn't put me into a school. But when I was going to school, I of course did try to tell my teachers, but they, basically they didn't believe me. They couldn't imagine that a mother was capable of that. And of course, I tried to talk to the police. It was the same thing. So in the end, I had no other choice than to live alone, because nobody would help me, nobody would want me, nobody would take me. At least that's the way I felt. I felt that nobody wanted me, that there was something wrong with me. I didn't realize that they didn't believe me. Because when they didn't believe me, they didn't say, well, we're not believing you. They said something like, one does not talk back. One does not talk bad about one's mother. Or they said something like, how can you say something bad about your mother? How can you not follow your mother? You have to do what your mother tells you. I didn't realize that they said that because they didn't believe me. I thought they believed me. They believed that I was being sexually abused by my mother. But the answer they gave in my eyes sounded like I had to endure it. It sounded like there was something wrong with me for not wanting to be sexually abused. That's the way it sounded to me. Of course, that was not their intention. They didn't believe me, but they didn't say that. They said something like that. So, and of course, a pedophile, when a pedophile sexually abuses a small child, the pedophile will try to make the child believe that there is something wrong with the child. Because of course the child does not want to be sexually abused. So the pedophile will tell the child, there's something wrong with you. You're wrong for not wanting to be sexually abused. This is totally normal. That's what the pedophile will want the child to believe. And of course that's what my mother wanted me to believe. So I had very low self-esteem. I always thought that there was something wrong with me. And this was a big problem for me growing up, because when I was older, I was because, as I said, when I was 15 years old, I ran away anyway, and I was living alone since I was 15 years old. So of course then my mother couldn't do anything anymore because I ran away. But it was still very difficult for me because I had such low self-esteem, and because I always thought there was something wrong with me. So it was really, really difficult. So after I ran away, and after I had been living, when I was like 17 years old, I had been living on my own for 2 years, and it was pretty good, not having my mother around. That was pretty good. So in that sense, living alone was pretty good, and it was much better. It was much better than it was before, of course. But it was still very difficult for me because I had no contact, no social contacts. I had no contact with society. I had no social contact because I was bullied. When I was in school, I was bullied because I was insecure. And of course, the other children saw that I was insecure, so they would bully me and beat me up. So that resulted in me being rather socially awkward. And of course, my mother also, she very much separated me from normal society when I was still living with my mother, because my mother was very radical. Let's put it that way. She was a Communist Party member, and not just a Communist Party member, but how do you say that? She was an official in the Communist Party, and there were also times when she basically tried to live in communist communes and communities like that. Some of them were fine, but some of those communities and communes were rather radical. So she was the environment I grew up in was very different from normal society, and her views were rather radical, very different from normal views, and she intentionally shielded me from normal society. So I was very socially awkward, and after having run away, I noticed that okay, I ran away from my mother, that's good, but then I realized I'm still very socially awkward, and I realized I never really had a family. I never had a normal family. I have no idea what a normal family is like. And I realized that not having had that was making it very difficult for me, because I had no social skills at all. And I realized that if I was going to live a normal life, I needed social skills, and I needed the normal experience that everyone has growing up, having normal parents, and I never had that. And my teacher, who didn't believe me, so it was a mixture of not believing what was going on with my mother and not wanting to believe it. Anyway, so he was clueless about what was going on in my childhood, or he wanted to be clueless. I'm not entirely sure. But anyway, he said, and he was my English teacher, so he realized that my English was rather good, and not realizing what a difficult childhood I really had, he suggested that I become an exchange student, and because in Germany in the 11th grade you can be an exchange student for 1 year. So I was in 11th grade, and was the 11th grade for me in Germany, but it was the 12th grade when I went to the US. So anyway, for 1 year I went to the US as an exchange student. The reason I did that, actually there were multiple reasons, but one major reason I did that is because when you're an exchange student, you live with a how do you call it? You live with a, do you call it a foster family? No, not a foster family. Well, something like that. You live with a family over there. So so basically I thought, well, I have the opportunity to live with a family for 1 year. And I thought, great, awesome, because that's just what I wanted, to know what it feels like living with a normal family, because I never had a family. I just had my mother, who beat me up and sexually abused me, and she beat me up really bad, and she really did sexually abuse me. I don't know if I should go into that, but she really did very, very bad things, and she when I didn't want to, and of course I didn't want to get sexually abused, but when I refused, then she would beat me up, but not how you normally think, of a parent beating a little child, not like oh, slap in the face or slap on the butt or something like that. No. When she beat me up, she really beat me up good. She punched me in the stomach, kicked my face, smashed me to the ground, stomped on me, and I was seriously injured. And I was, when I was a very young child. She started doing that when I was like 2 years old. Okay, that's when I was 2 years old. She first started with the sexual abuse. She intentionally started that young because she thought that if she does it when I'm still that young, then I won't be able to remember it when I'm older. So anyway, she did really, really bad things, and it was really difficult for me, of course. So I really needed to know what a normal childhood is like, especially because I needed those social skills I never had. I never had the opportunity to develop because my mother secluded me from normal society. So becoming an exchange student for a year and living with a family, I thought this was a great opportunity for me to acquire those social skills that I so desperately needed, and for me to see what living in a normal family is actually like. Because my mother, of course, she always demonized normal society, but at that point I already realized that she was telling lies, and that normal society is not as bad as she wanted me to believe. So and on top of that, it wasn't just a normal German family, but it was going to be a normal US family, and in my opinion that was even better because I had I had no idea what the US is actually like. All I knew from the US was what I had seen in movies, and so the image of a typical family in the US was basically like, I don't know, like maybe a Mormon family or something. That's what I thought what a normal family in the US would be like, all Mormons and all really, like maybe how they lived in the 50s, like that stereotypical image people might have of a family in the 50s in the US, and maybe Mormons and very religious. And I thought, that's great, that's great. I finally, I can finally see what a normal family is like. And it was the same with school. As I said, my mother didn't let me go to school for a long period of time, but then the authorities got wind of that, and they forced her to put me into a school. And of course, my mother taught me that, as I said, she taught me that all of society, except of course the communes she was living in, but that all of society was really, really bad and evil, and that the school system was really bad and evil, and that if you go to school, it's horrible, and you will get bullied and beaten up. That's what she told me. And she also told me the same thing about the police. She told me that if I ever talk to the police, they will arrest me, and they will put me into prison. And if I ever talk about a teacher, if I ever tell a teacher what my mother did to me, then the teacher would send me to, what do you call it? Well, anyway, that I would end up in some kind of foster home, and that I would that it would be really bad, and that I would be bullied and stuff like that. And she, of course, the reason she said that is because she wanted to prevent me from getting help. And of course that wasn't even necessary, because nobody believed me anyway. And of course, with time, I realized that what she told me about society was all lies, and that society was not at all as bad as she wanted me to believe. But then when I went to school, I realized my mother was right. I was being bullied. It was terrible. And when I tried to get help from the police, I realized she was right. They were going to arrest me. Of course they weren't, you know. The police just didn't believe me. And you know, what happened is I actually tried to get help. When I tried to get help from the police, I was a little older. I was maybe 12 years old. Okay? So what had happened is that, as I said, my mother always beat me up very badly. So when I was 12 years old, for the first time, my mother was still very strong and was still much stronger than I was, because my mother is very big and she's very strong. Okay, so but when I was 12 years old, I was for the first time I was kind of able to defend myself, and so I tried to defend myself, and of course I always try to get help, and there were times where I called the police, but I wasn't really able to articulate what had happened to me. I wasn't able to explain. I wasn't even myself aware that my mother had sexually abused me. I didn't really realize that, so I couldn't say, please help me, I'm being sexually abused. So when I tried to call the police and get help, they never realized what was going on. They thought maybe I was prank calling them or something. Because I was so insecure, I couldn't really articulate what was going on. So when I tried to get the police to help me, they never helped me. And when I tried to call the police, they never came. But what happened is, of course, I continued trying to get help, and I was getting better at articulating what was happening to me. And that was when I was a little older, when I was like 12 years old. I was getting better at articulating what was going on. So my mother realized that, and my mother realized that, if I were to call the police now, they might believe me. So she had to prevent that. So what happened is, when she was trying to beat me up, I tried to defend myself. And of course I couldn't really defend myself. I used a broomstick, to keep her at distance, so that she couldn't get close, couldn't touch me, and couldn't beat me up. She seriously, there were times she seriously injured me. Anyway, so I tried to defend myself. So when I started to defend myself, she backed up, and I thought, great, it worked. What she did do is she called the police. And I was, great, she's calling the police, finally. Because when I called them, they never come. But now when she calls them, they will probably come. Great, then I can tell them what's going on and they will help me. Awesome. And they did come. But what happened is that they talked with my mother first. But I said, well, that doesn't matter. Afterwards they're still going to talk to me, and I can explain to them what's going on, and they will help me, and they will put me into protective custody. And at that time I realized that protective custody is not as bad as my mother wanted me to believe. Children when children are in the custody of the state, they're not getting tortured like my mother told me. At that point I realized that, and I realized that the police is not gonna imprison me if I try to get help from them. I realized that, so I thought, great. Now, okay, my mother is talking with them first. Fine, let her talk with them, but then they'll talk to me, and I'll explain what's going on, and they will help me, and they put me in protective custody. Well, that's not what happened. What happened is that I don't know what my mother told them, but when they were done talking with my mother, they didn't talk to me at all. They just yelled at me and said, if you ever hit your mother again, we will arrest you. You got that, little bastard? Fuck you! That's basically what they said in German. So it sounds better in German. So then they just went off. you know. Now, of course, I realized that, okay, yeah, well, they thought, maybe, they didn't realize that, and they didn't give me time to explain it. And at that time, I didn't understand the concept. So I wouldn't have been able to explain it anyway. So, but of course, they didn't realize that I was acting in self-defense, and I wasn't even hitting my mother anyway. I didn't reach her anyway. But it was in self-defense. So, but at that time, I didn't have a concept. I didn't know that there was a concept of self-defense. I didn't understand that. And of course, because they only talked to my mother, they didn't and didn't give me any opportunity to explain. They didn't realize I was acting in self-defense either. And of course, now I realize that, okay, they were probably busy. They had maybe a lot of stuff to do that day, and maybe they didn't have lunch yet. So, they just, and of course, this is, in their eyes, this was just a minor thing. It wasn't important. And so they just wanted to wrap this up as quickly as possible. And they thought that, by yelling and threatening the child, they can solve the matter faster. So, and then they can just, leave after that and have their lunch or whatever, But of course, for me, this was very devastating, because I just began to realize that things are not the way my mother told me. And then but every time I was trying to get help, I realized things are exactly the way my mother told me. She was right. When I tried to get help from the police, they will threaten to imprison me. That's exactly what they did. She was right. And when I go to school, schools are evil places where children get bullied. She was right. She was right about everything. And the whole society was as evil as my mother told me. Of course not. But at that time, I was not aware of something that I'm aware of now, and that is called a self-fulfilling prophecy. Right? If you're getting told that society is evil and that everybody is evil, and you have that kind of expectation, and then you're timid and you're afraid, then what you're afraid of will happen, because people will see you're afraid, you're timid, and then of course they will bully you, for example. So whatever you're afraid of, that is likely what is going to happen. But the reason it is happening is not because society is evil, but because of your fear, because it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. And it was only after I realized that I was able to break out of that cycle.